to 1 Samuel. We're going to do a little bit of review here. There's a lot of stuff that happens here. But 1 Samuel chapter 18, we're going to read quite a bit. And again, we're not going to spend a ton of time other than reading this. Brother Philip just went through a lot of this not that long ago. But as a reminder, we will read 1 Samuel chapter 18, starting in verse 6. It says, "It came to pass, as they came, when David was returned from the slaughter of the Philistines, that the women came out of all the cities of Israel, singing and dancing to meet King Saul, with tabrets, with joy, and with instruments of music. And the women answered one another as they played, and said, Saul has slain his thousands, and David his 10,000s. And Saul was very wroth, and the saying displeased him. And he said, They have ascribed unto David 10,000s, and to me they have ascribed but thousands. And what can he have more but the kingdom? And Saul eyed David from that day and forward. And it came to pass on the morrow that the evil spirit from God came upon Saul, and he prophesied in the midst of the house. And David played with his hand as at other times, and there was a javelin in Saul's hand. And Saul cast the javelin, for he said, I will smite David even to the wall with it. And David avoided out of his presence twice. And Saul was afraid of David, because the Lord was with him, and was departed from Saul. Therefore Saul removed him from him, and made him his captain over 1,000. And he went out and came in before the people. And David behaved himself wisely in all his ways, and the Lord was with him. Wherefore when Saul saw that he had behaved himself very wisely, he was afraid of him. But all Israel and Judah loved David, because he went out and came in before them." Now up to this point, we see here where Saul's jealousy is starting to show through. And it says on multiple times that he is afraid of David. He is afraid that David is going to take over his kingdom. He's afraid David is stealing the hearts of the people. And at one point, in an angry fit, it seems that he takes his javelin and he decides he is going to literally pin David to the wall. And of course, he misses. The Lord delivers David. But you see here this attitude of anger and bitterness toward him. But you also see that the people, the common people, the people of Judah and Israel loved David. And he behaved himself wisely in front of them. And he was courageous and he was brave, and he's just this guy, and the people did love him. It says in verse 17, "And Saul said to David, Behold, my elder daughter Merab, her will I give thee to wife, only be thou valiant for me, and fight the Lord's battles. For Saul said, Let not mine hand be upon him, but let the hand of the Philistines be upon him." Now, why did Saul not want his hand to be upon David? Well, because the people are loving David more and more and more, right? And so he gets this idea, I'm going to motivate David, I'm going to offer my daughter to him, and he's going to go out and he's going to fight these battles, and I hope he dies. That's really what he's saying, right? And David, in verse 18, "And David said unto Saul, Who am I, and what is my life, or my father's family in Israel, that I should be son-in-law to the king? But it came to pass at the time when Merab, Saul's daughter, should have been given to David, that she was given to Adriel the Mehitholite to wife. And Michal, Saul's daughter, loved David, and they told Saul the thing, and it pleased him. And Saul said, I will give him her, that she may be a snare to him, and that the hand of the Philistines may be against him. Wherefore Saul said to David, Thou shalt this day be my son-in-law in the one of the twain." Now you see here where he doesn't fulfill his word. He gives the daughter to somebody else. But his other daughter, Michal, loves David. He finds out about that. And this really loving, caring, compassionate father says, oh, this is great. I'm going to pair the two of them up, and she's going to be a snare and get him in trouble, and maybe he'll finally lose his life. Right? What a guy. But that's what he does. And then it says in verse 22, and by the way, you see here his deceitfulness in this. right? Not only his deceitfulness to David, but his deceitfulness to his own daughter. But he says in verse 22, and Saul commanded his servants, saying, commune with David secretly, and say, behold, the king hath delight in thee, and all his servants love thee. Now therefore be the king's son-in-law. Again, do you see the deceit that's going on? He is stirring up others and saying, hey, I don't want this to come from me. You go tell David, oh man, the king loves you so much. He wants you to be his son-in-law. It would be an honor to him if you would be his son-in-law. That's what the king's feelings are. He is getting other people to lie for him. Verse 23, and Saul's servants spake these words in the ears of David, and David said, seemeth it to you a light thing to be a king's son-in-law, seeing that I am a poor man and lightly esteemed? And the servants of Saul told him, saying, on this manner spake David. And Saul said, thus shall ye say to David, the king desireth not any dowry, but 100 foreskins of the Philistines to be avenged of the king's enemies. But Saul thought to make David fall by the hand of the Philistines. And when his servants told David these words, it pleased David well to be the king's son-in-law, and the days were not expired. Wherefore David arose and went, he and his men, and slew of the Philistines 200 men. And David brought their foreskins, and they gave them in full tale to the king, that he might be the king's son-in-law. And Saul gave him Michal, his daughter, to wife. The whole thing is all about getting David to put himself in danger. Do you see how bloodthirsty that Saul is? He weaves this whole deceitful tale about how much he loves David and wants David to be his son-in-law, and he doesn't want anything from David. David, I don't need a dowry. David, I don't need anything from you. But you know what I'd really love for you is to go out and kill 100 Philistines and bring me back the proof that you've done it, right? And so David and his men go out, and they don't only do 100, they kill 200. And they bring them back to the king. And the king does end up giving Michal to be David's wife. In verse 28, and Saul saw and knew that the Lord was with David, and that Michal, son's daughter, loved him. This has just got to burn this guy like twice over. First off, he's hoping David dies. Well, David's not only successful, he's twice as successful as what was intended. And now he still deals with this thing that his own daughter loves David. And so his daughter loves David, married to David. David's even more successful than he was before. And Saul has really been beaten twice in one story. And it just causes him to fear David even more. And then in verse 30, then the princes of the Philistines went forth, and it came to pass after they went forth that David behaved himself more wisely than all the servants of Saul, so that his name was much set by. And then if you turn over to the next chapter, chapter 19, and Saul spake to Jonathan his son and to all his servants that they should kill David. But Jonathan's son delighted much in David, and Jonathan told David, saying, Saul my father seeketh to kill thee. Now therefore I pray thee, take heed to thyself until the morning, and abide in a secret place, and hide thyself. And I will go out and stand beside my father in the field where thou art, and I will commune with my father of thee, and what I see that I will tell thee. And Jonathan spake good of David unto Saul his father, and said unto him, Let not the king sin against his servant, against David, because he hath not sinned against thee, and because his works have been to thee word very good. For he did put his life in his hand, and slew the Philistines, and the Lord wrought a great salvation for all Israel. Thou sawest it, and did rejoice. Wherefore then wilt thou sin against innocent blood to slay David without a cause? Jonathan goes to bat for David, and he reminds Saul of, hey, David has done these things for you and your cause. He has defended Israel, and he's had a great battle, and there was a time when you yourself rejoiced over the battles of David and the things that David has done. And David is innocent of these things that you are accusing him of, and anybody around you that's saying that this is what David's doing, it's not true. And he reminds him how David had taken his own life into his hands to defend the kingdom and defend Saul. In verse 6, and Saul hearkened unto the voice of Jonathan, and Saul sware, as the Lord liveth, he shall not be slain. Now I want you to notice this, and this is really not the point of what we're talking about, but I'm going to hit it while I'm here. He swore before the Lord and used the Lord's name that David would not be slain. Now, in the end, hey, he was right. David wasn't slain, but he broke his promise in that after this he did continue to try to kill David. You see here really a blatant situation where he uses the name of the Lord to swear something, and then later goes right back and tries to do what he swore wouldn't be done. Verse 7, and Jonathan called David, and Jonathan showed him all those things. And Jonathan brought David to Saul, and he was in his presence as in times past. And there was war again, and David went out and fought with the Philistines, and slew them with a great slaughter, and they fled from him. And the evil spirit from the Lord was upon Saul as he sat in his house with his javelin in his hand, and David played with his hand. And Saul sought to smite David, even to the wall with the javelin. But he slipped away out of Saul's presence, and he smote the javelin into the wall, and David fled and escaped that night. I'm not going to kill David. I promise I'm not going to kill David. I swear before God I'm not going to kill David. And things seem to be okay for a little while, and there's another battle, and David does what David does. He goes out and courageously fights. He's very successful. And now this jealousy thing starts to come back up in Saul again. And the next thing you know, when he's there with David, and David's playing, whoosh, tries to get him again. And David, of course, escapes again. But it says in verse 11, and Saul also sent messengers unto David's house to watch him and to slay him in the morning. And Michal, David's wife, told him, saying, if thou save not thy life tonight, tomorrow thou shalt be slain. So you imagine David gets away, and what's happened in the past is David gets away, Saul calms down, things kind of go back to normal. Well, this time, David gets away, and Saul actually sends people to surround David's house with the intent of, listen, David ain't going to make it. When David goes to leave in the morning, we're going to get him. And if he don't, we're going to go in and we're going to find him. But you see that Saul sends people to his own daughter's house with the intent of getting her husband, getting David. Right? And they're going to kill him. And David's wife knows about this, sees this, somehow she knows. And she basically tells David, look, if you don't get away tonight, you aren't going to get away. In other words, right now, under the cover of darkness, you might be able to escape. But if you're still here in the morning, it's going to be over. So it says in verse 12, so Michal let David down through a window, and he went and fled and escaped. And Michal took an image and laid it in the bed and put a pillow of goat's hair for its bolster and covered it with a cloth. And when Saul sent messengers to take David, she said, he is sick. And Saul sent the messengers again to see David, saying, bring him up to me in the bed that I may slay him. You almost imagine that the messengers come in, and she says, oh, he's sick. And you almost get the impression like they could maybe see him through the doorway or whatever, like, oh, he's laying in bed, he's sick, leave him alone. And so the messengers go back to Saul, they convey that message. Saul says, I don't care. Like, I sent you to kill him. Like, why would I care if he's sick in bed? Go pick up the bed and bring it to me. Of course, he's not really there. We know that, right? And it says in verse 16, and when the messengers were come in, behold, there was an image in the bed, and with pillows of goat's hair for his bolster. Now, I want you to notice something at the end of verse 15. Bring him to me in the bed that I may slay him. He sent messengers to slay David. But it's almost like when he heard David was sick, now it becomes, bring him to me that I may slay him. You just see the hatred here, that he's literally willing to take a man supposedly sick in bed, bring him to me, and I will kill him while he lays sick in his bed. But of course we know that it isn't really David in verse 17. And Saul said unto Michal, Why hast thou deceived me so, and sent away mine enemy that he is escaped? And Michal answered Saul, He said unto me, Let me go, why should I kill thee? Now Michal then basically says, well, I let him go because he said I was going to kill him if I didn't. So David fled and escaped and came to Samuel to Ramah and told him all that Saul had done to him. And he and Samuel went and dwelt in Naioth. And then we can stop reading here. It continues on. Saul is seeking him. He's hearing where he's at. And you know the rest of the story, right? Brother Philip has done a really good job of covering all of this not that long ago. And this is really kind of the true start of all of the different chasing cat and mouse back and forth that goes on with Saul and David throughout the rest of the story. Now, I read this because the psalm that we want to cover, according to the superscription, is dealing with this event. Okay? So Psalms chapter 59, it says in the superscription, to the chief musician, Altashaith, a Mitcham of David, when Saul sent and they watched the house to kill him. So as you read the psalm, I want you to imagine Saul is bitterly jealous. David has actually been doing really good. He's been faithful to the country. He's been faithful to the king. He's been such an asset in battle, and he's proved himself time and time again. And yet the king tries to kill him. And then there's this whole thing where he basically puts a hit out on him. Jonathan talks him into, like, don't do this. David's faithful. You know, you need to get past this, Dad. This is not really what David is. David's not out to get you. David's not out to take over the kingdom. David has fought for you, and David has fought for this kingdom. And then things calm down a little bit, and then David does what David does, and he's faithful, and he's fearless, and he's serving the country. And now the king tries to kill him again, right? But in the middle of all this, Saul has buddied up to him and talked about how he loves him, and I love you so much, I want you to be my son-in-law, and here's my daughter, right? Man, if I'm David, I am super confused. Like, I go from having a javelin thrown at me to things being good. Matter of fact, things are so good, let me give you my daughter. And now he's got his daughter, that's his wife. Man, now you think you're really in, right? And then the next thing you know, you got another javelin thrown at you. And then you get home, and in the course of, I don't know all the events, it doesn't give us a lot of detail. At some point, Michal comes to him and says, listen, the house is surrounded. Like, they're out to get you, David, and if you're still here in the morning, you won't make it. You need to leave. And his wife has to literally let him down through a window so he can sneak off in the middle of the night away from his own father-in-law, the king that he has fought for, the king that he's been faithful to. It is obvious that this is no, I'm just angry and I'm throwing something at you, right? I think by this point, he's having to sneak out of his own house and flee. It's really become apparent that, listen, Saul is out to kill you, David. This is no just burst of anger. Like, he is out to get you. But yet to go from, I love you so much, David, I literally want you to be my son-in-law, to the realization that no, Saul didn't mean any of that. And he's just trying to kill you. It's that context in which this psalm is written, okay? And so listen to the words of this as you think about that story and the things that David went through. It says in verse 1 of Psalm chapter 59, Deliver me from mine enemies, O my God. Defend me from them that rise up against me. Deliver me from the workers of iniquity and save me from bloody men. I think David had full justification in uttering those words, right? This was a real threat. This is no perceived threat. This is no maybe. But David is now realizing, as he's had to sneak out of his own house in cover of darkness, that he is up against great judgment that's coming. And it's not judgment that he deserves, but he describes it as a need to be delivered from enemies. Now, Saul is the obvious enemy, but I think we know that as you study David's life and Saul's life and others, Saul did have some around him that were not willing to stand up and tell him the truth, and in a few cases were even willing to stretch the truth to make David look bad, right? And so you'd have to, if you're in David's position, you probably don't even know who your enemies are. You know Saul, but there's probably more. It says, deliver me from mine enemies, O my God, and defend me from them that rise up against me. His prayer to the Lord is that the Lord would be his deliverance and his defense. Lord, you need to protect me and you need to deliver me. Of course, David always does this in a way that's not haughty, right? You understand from all of David's Psalms that he was, when it came to his relationship with the Lord, he had a humble, meek attitude of himself, right, toward God. But he does know that he can come boldly before the Lord and say, Lord, I need you. I need your help. I need you to deliver me. You have to feel like, I would imagine, there can't be any help outside of God. I mean, what do you mean? We downplay this sometimes, okay? You think about, it's one thing to try to get away from your enemies, but what if your enemy is the guy that runs the whole kingdom? He's got all kinds of resources at his disposal. I mean, the man has the army of the nation at his disposal. He's got spies everywhere. I mean, can you imagine? Like, it's one thing for somebody at work to have it out against you, right? Or a family member that's got their attitude bent sideways and they're out to get you. Can you imagine if it was the President of the United States that had specifically targeted you? I mean, that's kind of comparable to where David is at right now, right? And he recognizes that, Lord, deliverance is going to have to come from you. And in verse 2, he calls it what it is. And he says, deliver me from the workers of iniquity. Now listen, David may have made up his mind that in the coming time beyond this, that he is not going to take Saul's life because Saul is the anointed of God. But you don't have to try too hard to read some of David's writings to realize that that doesn't mean that David thought Saul was right. It doesn't mean that David thought Saul was pure as the driven snow. Listen, he describes Saul and those that are helping Saul as workers of iniquity. These guys are unholy, they are deceitful, and they are bloodthirsty. And David just says it the way it is. Deliver me from the workers of iniquity and save me from bloody men. I wonder if by now David is realizing, Saul didn't really love me. Saul didn't really love me so much he wanted me to marry his daughter so I could be his son-in-law. Well, if that's the case, man, he sent me to kill 100 Philistines just because. I killed 100 Philistines. He probably wanted me to die, but He literally sent me to take the life of 100 Philistines with the intent that I would die. Man, that is a bloodthirsty concept. And now they're surrounding me and they're out for my blood. He says in verse 3, "For lo, they lie in wait for my soul. The mighty are gathered against me, not for my transgression, not for my sin, O Lord." As he goes to the Lord and he asks the Lord for help and defense and deliverance, he also lays out his cause. And he says, listen, those that are against me are workers of iniquity. They're bloody men. They are deceitful. They are lying in wait for my soul. Man, that's a pretty fitting description considering the fact that Saul just sent people to surround his house so they could take him. Right? That's literally lying in wait for his soul. But it goes beyond that. The mighty are gathered against me. And this is where, when he goes to the Lord and he asks the Lord for help and deliverance and defense, he lays out his cause in the fact that he says, listen, Lord, I know that they are not against me because of my sin. It's not because I transgressed. It's not because I've wicked. It's not because I've broken some law of the country. It's not because I did anything wrong. Here you see that he recognizes they aren't after me because of my sin. They're after me because they're evil. They're after me because they're workers of iniquity. Now, I think we know enough about David to know that David is not saying he's without sin. He is saying they are chasing me without a cause. Right? It's not the same thing. To say that, listen, somebody is after me, but it's not because I did something wrong, is not the same thing as saying I'm without sin. And I only say that because when you read some commentaries on this chapter, they'll say that this chapter is really a picture of Christ and David's a type and a shadow. And I do understand that David's a type and a shadow of Christ to some degree. But they'll point to this verse and say, yeah, see, David was saying he's talking about Christ because he's saying he's without sin. David's not saying he's without sin in this chapter, in this verse. He's saying that the people are pursuing him and trying to kill him without a just cause, which is not the same thing. And sorry for that rant, but I couldn't help but say it because I read one guy about that and I'm like, how do you walk away from that statement saying David says he's without sin? Like, that's not what he's saying. He's just saying he's not guilty in the thing they're pursuing him for. In verse 4, they run and prepare themselves without my fault. Awake to help me, and behold. So the men that are now lying in wait, they're gathered together. They are running and preparing themselves to take David, even though David is not at fault. We don't ever want to be in these situations, but I think it is important to realize that in this old sinful world, things like this can happen. Right? They can. I mean, I know it was all part of God's plan, but listen, Jesus Christ absolutely fell into this. They pursued him without cause. He was not at fault. You look at some of the sufferings that Peter and John and those guys went through as apostles. Man, they were imprisoned, they were beaten, they were done horrible things to. But they weren't at fault. They weren't guilty. It happens. Thankfully, we have a lot of freedom in this country right now. But listen, be prepared. Things like this could happen to you. And if it does, and when it does, what I need you to take away from this is there is one place you can go for true deliverance and defense. The Constitution. No? I see a few of you shaking your head. Hey, the Constitution's a great thing. Constitution's not the Scripture. Constitution is a man-made document. The principles behind it, some of them are built on Scripture. But listen, that's not your defense. Your defense is God. Your defense is the Lord. Okay. He says in the last half of verse 4, awake to help me, and behold. Now this is obviously, the Lord never sleeps, He never slumbers, right? This is not David teaching that God sleeps and you have to go wake Him up and he doesn't really see it. Listen, we understand that God is ever present. He knows all, He sees all. But the psalmist is coming to Him with a pleading His cause. And he's saying, this is what's happening, Lord. Lord, show Yourself in this. Deliver me and protect me and help me. And Lord, just behold what they have done to me and what they are doing to me. In verse 5, Thou, therefore, O Lord God of hosts, the God of Israel, awake to visit all the heathen. Be not merciful to any wicked transgressors. Selah. This prayer involves, Lord, be my defense. Lord, be my deliverer. Lord, this is the wickedness that people are doing to me. Lord, I'm laying out my cause to You and that I am not guilty of these things that they're pursuing me for. Lord, I need You to plead my cause. And Lord, I need You to bring swift judgment on those that are against me. We want to be careful doing this, but listen, it is not always inappropriate to ask the Lord to send His judgment. Now, we need to be careful, right? Remember, this is the same God that can judge us too. But David here does say, Lord, send judgment on the what? Wicked transgressors. The wicked transgressors. It says in verse 6, he goes on to describe them. He says, they return at evening. They make a noise like a dog and go around about the city. Behold, they belch out with their mouth. Swords are in their lips, for who say they doth hear? Those verses, he's using descriptors to kind of paint a picture in your mind. These are like, these enemies, they just won't go away. It's like they come back every night. That's a pretty good way of describing Saul, isn't it? They return at evening. Man, it's like we had a reprieve, and he's back again. We had a reprieve, and he's back again. Man, they just won't leave me alone. And then he describes them as they make a noise like a dog and go round about the city. Listen, there's times when I've had to get up, something's going on, or work, or whatever, and with my back stuff, you know, I've had to maybe sleep out in the living room occasionally, right? And listen, we have a couple dogs. And you know what happens? If there's a deer, if there's a rabbit, if there's anything out in the woods, right? What do? Right? And man, you hear them jump up on the porch and they run down the steps, they run around the house, and you hear them. Like, literally, they're making a lot of noise and they're barking the whole way. And it's like they're just going around the house. Right? He says, man, Saul and his people, they just come back every night. And about the time you think it's done, here they come again. It's like a dog that's just barking all around the city. You can't sleep, you can't rest. Man, they're just, oh. And behold, they belch out with their mouth. That means to spew forth. And swords are in their lips, for who say they doth hear? There's a couple things there. Listen, remember what happened just recently? Saul comes up to David, sends messengers to David, and says, sweetly and kindly, I want you to be my son-in-law. I love you so much. Man, would you just marry my daughter? Right? What does David see now? Their lips are like swords. They're deceitful, and what they say is meant to cut. But not only that, there's almost this attitude of, we can say these things, we can do these things, because who's going to do anything about it? Right? Who's going to hear? Who's going to do anything? Again, keep in context, David is talking about one of his principal enemies is the king of the country. If he says, go get David, what do you think the people are going to do? They're going to go get David. If David says to his servants, hey, you go tell David that I really love him and I want him to marry my daughter, and then we're going to see if we can get him killed. You know, David has to be in a place where he feels like his enemies are able to say what they want and nobody's going to do anything. But that's when he goes back and he leans on the Lord in verse 8. But thou, O Lord, shalt laugh at them. Thou shalt have all the heathen in derision. Because of his strength will I wait upon thee, for God is my defense. Nothing can overthrow the Lord. Nobody can say and do anything that he's not aware of and doesn't know the end of. And so David can confidently say, Lord, I know that you will laugh at the wicked and their plans. You'll have them in derision. In verse 9 he says, because of his strength will I wait upon thee. However you want to take that. I personally take that to say, David is looking at the strength of his enemies and saying, because of the strength of my enemies, I will wait on thee, O Lord. Again, where is the strength? The strength is in God. It's the only place. David recognizes it's the only place that he can go that will really, truly be a defense against his enemies. In verse 10, the God of my mercy shall prevent me. That prevent me in this context means to go before. The God of my mercy shall prevent me. God shall let me see my desire upon mine enemies. He is my defense. He's my deliverer. He is the one that goes out in front of me, clearing the way. And I know that I will see the destruction of my enemies. I know that I will see mine enemies overthrown. But he also says in verse 11, slay them not, lest my people forget. Scatter them by thy power, and bring them down, O Lord, our shield. Man, disperse them. Do it in a way, Lord, where people know this is you that's done this. Lord, just disperse them. Verse 12, for the sin of their mouth and the words of their lips, let them even be taken in their pride, and for cursing and lying which they speak. Now, what happened? I just, as I read these words from David, you can't help but think that he has something in mind. For the sin of their mouth and the words of their lips, let them even be taken in their pride, and for cursing and lying which they speak. What has Saul done? Why is Saul pursuing David? Well, he's afraid he's going to take over the kingdom. It's not just that. His pride's been hurt. His pride has been hurt. What started all this? Saul has killed his thousands, David his 10,000s. And what did Saul say? Saul said, oh, how dare they? They're talking about the thousands I've killed and the tens of thousands that David's killed. They love him more than they love me. What is it? His pride has been hurt. He's jealous. And what does he do because of that jealousy and that rage and that fear that starts to indwell him? Well, he starts to spew out lying and cursing. By the way, what did he do? He used the name of the Lord to swear that he would not hurt David, and then turned around and tried to hurt David. He's cursing, he's lying, he's deceitful, and it all seems to stem from his pride. This is a good warning, by the way. This is a really, really good practical warning. You think about Saul and where he ended up. What did he see? What did he see? Oh, they love David more than me. They like David more than me. David's going to get more popular than me. David's going to get more followers than me. David this, David that. And what did that turn into? Well, it turned into a bitterness. That jealousy began to eat him alive from the inside. And the bitterness turned into anger. And the anger led him to do deceitful, wicked things. I hope you see the progression of what happens when we let things like that get in. It says in verse 13, consume them in wrath, consume them that they may not be, and let them know that God ruleth in Jacob unto the ends of the earth. It is interesting to me that Saul was still willing to use the name of the Lord. You see this multiple times as he's chasing David. He's willing to use the name of the Lord. There's even a few times where he says that people are doing the Lord's work basically by trying to get David. I'm paraphrasing, but that's basically what he's doing. But yet when you look at this verse, what do we see? Lord, consume them. Consume them and show them who really is in control. It's amazing when you think about it. In reality, Saul's actions show that he thought he could circumvent God's plan. That's really what he thought. Listen, you read it when you read 1 and 2 Samuel. There was a time where even Saul recognized God wants David to be king. But it didn't stop him from trying to overthrow David. In verse 14, at evening let them return, let them make a noise like a dog and go round about the city. Let them wander up and down for meat and grudge if they be not satisfied. He says, listen, they're going to do what they're going to do and they're going to do all that stuff. And Lord, I know your judgment's coming. But no matter what they do, verse 16, but I will sing of thy power. Yea, I will sing aloud of thy mercy in the morning. Thou hast been my defense and refuge in the day of my trouble. Unto thee, O my strength, will I sing, for God is my defense and the God of my mercy. He wraps up this song by declaring who these wicked people are, declaring that God's judgment's coming, and then saying, despite what those guys are doing and the things they're doing, and they're going around making a loud noise, what I'm going to keep doing is I'm going to keep praising you. I'm going to keep worshiping you. I'm going to keep waiting on you. I'm going to continue to be under the protection of your defense. And I'm going to sing and I'm going to worship you and I'm going to declare and I'm going to give you the glory for all of that. Now, I've said this a few times. Listen, we may not be in quite the clear, apparent situation that David was, right? As far as I know, I don't have a king or a president or a great ruler chasing after me. I don't. But listen, the principles behind what's talked about here apply whether you're talking about super powerful enemies that are even viewed powerful in this world, to maybe just the everyday enemies that we have. And even though there's some enemies we probably have some that are personal, physical, living beings that we may not even know they don't like us. But I also do know that there is a culture in this country, a growing culture in this country, on different fronts. I don't even have a specific one in mind. Listen, they do not like us. And they are going about trying to twist our words, trying to make us seem like the bad guy, trying to take and make us look like we are the ones that need to be pursued, like we are the ones. So don't get into maybe lulled into a false sense of peace. There is wickedness in this world, and it absolutely wants your testimony. It wants your life in some cases, and you need to be vigilant. And you need to realize where your strength comes from. And it's more than just realizing where your strength comes from. The Bible teaches that we are supposed to go to Him and ask Him for the things that we need. Is He our defense? Is He our deliverer? Yes. That doesn't mean you get to sit there and never ask for His help, never ask for Him to help you, never ask for Him to deliver you. We are actually supposed to go to Him for those things. And while you're going through those things, and while you're not even sure how it's going to turn out, and while you're not sure how God is going to deliver, praise Him, worship Him, glorify Him, and keep on serving Him. Because no matter how it pans out in this life, we are confident in knowing that judgment is coming. Right? Judgment is coming. You keep doing what you need to do day in and day out. You keep serving Him. You keep worshiping Him. You keep praising Him. You keep leaning on Him. You leave the rest of it in His hands. You leave the rest of it in His hands. All right, we're going to end there. Ask Brother Philip if you'd come.